Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to our first chapter of Long Walk to Water. We are going to be doing this book as a screencastify. So you should be able to see my screen and me as I read. We're going to put pictures and maps and maybe even videos up on the slideshow as we go to help you guys kind of picture what is happening. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to try to do a chapter a day of the book. You can see it's kind of a small book, not super thick. So we're hoping to do a chapter a day, and we'll be done by June. So it won't take us super long, and I really hope you can tune in. You can count this as your independent reading. If you want to follow along by reading the actual PDF, we do have the PDF, so you can always do split screen of this video on one half of your screen and the PDF on the other. In case you forgot, we did go over some background. If you just want a refresher about what the book is about, you can click on this slide for the link to the intro slideshow. These are some vocabulary words from chapter 1 that you might hear. So the word droned is used. It's a verb that means to talk in a dull or boring voice or tone. The word hunching is used. It's to describe someone who's like bent or crooked in their posture. They talk about a group of rebels, which is a noun. It's a group of people who oppose or fight against the government. Muslim is a term that's mentioned, which you guys might remember from our religions unit, but that's people who practice the religion of Islam. And the word independence is mentioned, where a group of people is not subject to control by others, especially a government. So the book actually starts off and it alternates between two different points of view. The first point of view is Naya, who lives in southern Sudan in 2008. It alternates between Naya and Salva's story. Salva is a boy in 1985. And if you look at the book, the text actually changes the font based on whose perspective it is. So when it's Naya's perspective, it's like a reddish font. And when it's Salva's perspective, it's black. So beginning with Naya. Chapter 1, Southern Sudan, 2008. Going was easy. Going, the plastic container held only air. Tall for her 11 years, Naya could switch the handle from one hand to the other, swing the container by her side, or cradle it in both arms. She could even drag it behind her, bumping it against the ground and raising a tiny cloud of dust with each step. There was little weight going. There was only heat, the sun already baking the air, even though it was long before noon. It would take her half the morning if she didn't stop on the way. Heat, time, and thorns. Here's a picture of what Naya might look like, what she's talking about. She's carrying a water container, and here she's talking about going to get the water. So this picture shows water on the way back. So those containers are filled with water, and you can imagine that'd be really heavy. So heat, time, and thorns. Then it switches to Salva's perspective. So Southern Sudan, 1985. Salva sat cross-legged on the bench. He kept his head turned toward the front, hands folded back perfectly straight. Everything about him was paying attention to the teacher. Everything except his eyes and his mind. This is a picture of what Salva's classroom might look like. His eyes kept flicking toward the window, through which he could see the road home. Just a little while longer, a few minutes more, and he would be walking on that road. The teacher droned on with the lesson about the Arabic language. Salva spoke the language of his Dinka tribe at home, but in school, he learned Arabic, the official language of the Sudanese government far away to the north. 11 years old on his last birthday, Salva was a good student. He already knew the lesson, which was why he was letting his mind wander down the road ahead of his body. Salva was well aware of how lucky he was to be able to go to school. He could not attend the entire year because during the dry season, his family moved away from the village. But during the rainy season, he could walk to the school, which was only half an hour from his home. Salva's father was a successful man. He owned many head of cattle and worked as their village's judge, an honored, respected position. Salva had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. As each boy reached the age of about 10 years, he was sent off to school. Salva's older brother, Arik and Ring, had gone to school before him. Last year, it had been Salva's turn. His 2 sisters, Akit and Agnath, did not go to the school. Like the other girls in the village, they stayed home and learned from their mother how to keep house. Most of the time, Salva was glad to be able to go to school, but some days he wished he were still back at home herding cattle. So before I go on, he's sitting in school right now, but he's about to kind of have his mind wander to what it is like from home. So I thought that I could tell you a little bit about the Dinka and what his life might be like at home before we move on. So Salva is part of the Dinka tribe. Here's a map of Sudan, which is one of the biggest countries in Africa. And the southern part of Sudan actually became its own country in 2010. But that was before Salva was born, or after Salva was born. So this circle kind of shows you the southern part of Sudan. And you can see that it says Dinka here and Nuer. So those are different tribes that are in Africa and Sudan, and we can see that we know that Salva is part of the Dinka tribe. This is a video that I have for you about what a typical village and a typical house might look like in Sudan. So I'm just going to show you some of it. If you want to watch the full video, I have it linked on the Wakelet.
There is no talk of Southern Sudan without talking about the Dinka people. The Dinka is the largest tribe in Southern Sudan. They are Nilotic people related to the Luo of Kenya. I am at a homestead called Bai in Dinka, and the owner of this homestead is Mzee Bol Anyejong here. Bol Anyejong is going to show me around his one-story house called Ot in Dinka.
So this is what Salva's house probably looks like.
The single-story hut has a room about 4 feet off the ground. The hut has a relatively small entrance. It is windowless, but very cool in spite of the very hot temperatures in this region. The huts are usually round, though more modern ones are rectangular, and some are even plastered with cement. This one-story hut is the sleeping place for Mr. Ball's 5 children. It also serves as granary and food store. This is a store of millet that will serve for the rest of the year, and this is a store of groundnuts that they will use for the rest of this year.
So that's kind of where they store their food
Sorghum
and sleep.
and millet are central in the diet of the Dinka people.
This is them making
the
flour.
Or millet is crushed using mortar and pestle, ground and used to make bread, known to most East Africans simply as ugali. Then it is served with vegetables or meat or even milk. These are Dinka cattle keepers. They graze their cattle in groups with sometimes thousands of heads of cattle in just one cattle camp. The cattle are some of the most precious items a Dinka can own.
You can see that they look very different than the cows we're used to.
300 cows in order to pay bride price for just one wife.
So cows really show wealth in the Dinka culture.
I'm at a homestead called Bai.
So that's a little bit about what Salva's life is like. So just to go back to the reading, I am on page 3. Salva is he's remembering about his school and how he's thankful to have school, but he's also reminiscing about what his life is like at home. So picking up on page 3. Most of the time, Salva was glad he was able to go to school, but some days he wished he were still back at home herding cattle. He and his brothers, along with the sons of his father's other wives, would walk with the herds to the water holes, where there was good grazing. Their responsibilities depended on how old they were. Salva's younger brother, Couto, was taking care of just one cow, like his brothers before him. He would be in charge of more cows every year. Before Salva had begun going to school, he had helped look after the entire herd and his younger brother as well. The boys had to keep an eye on the cows, but the cows did not really need much care. That left plenty of time to play. Salva and the other boys made cows out of clay. The more cows you made, the richer you were, but they had to be fine, healthy animals. It took time to make a lump of clay look like a good cow. The boys would challenge each other to see who could make the most and best cows. Other times, they would practice with their bows and arrows, shooting at small animals or birds. They weren't very good at this yet, but once in a while, they got lucky. Those were the best days. When one of them managed to kill a ground squirrel or a rabbit, a guinea hen or a grouse, the boys' aimless play halted, and there was suddenly a lot of work to do. Some of them gathered wood to build a fire. Others helped clean and dress the animal. Then they roasted it on the fire. None of this took place quietly. Salva had his own opinion of how the fire should be built and how long the meat needed to be cooked, and so did each of the others. The fire needs to be bigger. It won't last long enough. We need more wood. No, it's big enough already. Quick, turn it over before it's ruined. The juices dripped and sizzled. A delicious smell filled the air. Finally, they couldn't wait 1 second longer. There was only enough for each boy to have a few bites, but oh, how delicious those bites were. Salva swallowed and turned his eyes back toward the teacher. He wished he hadn't recalled those times because the memories made him hungry. Milk. When he got home, he would have a bowl of fresh milk, which would keep his belly full until supper time. He knew just how it would be. His mother would rise from her work grinding meal and walk around to the side of the house that faced the road. She would shade her eyes with one hand, searching for him. From far off, he would see her bright orange headscarf, and he would raise his arm in greeting. By the time he reached the house, she would have gone inside to get his bowl of milk ready for him. Crack! The noise had come from outside. Was it a gunshot? Or just a car backfiring? The teacher stopped talking for a moment. Every head in the room turned toward the window. Nothing. Silence. The teacher cleared his throat, which drew the boys' attention to the front of the room again. He continued the lesson from where he left off. Then, crack, pow, pop, pop, crack! Ack-ack-ack-ack-ack-ack-ack! Gunfire. Everyone down! The teacher shouted. Some of the boys moved at once, ducking their heads and hunching over. Others sat frozen, their eyes and mouths wide open. Salva covered his head with his hands and looked from side to side in panic. The teacher edged his way along the wall to the window. He took a quick peek outside. The gunfire had stopped, but now people were shouting and running. Go quickly, all of you, the teacher said, his voice low and urgent. Into the bush. Do you hear me? Not home. Don't run home. They will be going into the villages. Stay away from the villages. Run into the bush. He went to the door and looked out again. Go, all of you, now. So when the teacher says to go into the bush refers to the untamed wilderness. So these are two pictures of what the bush might look like. So you can see there it's very, very wide. It's open. There's not a lot of places to go. Doesn't look like a lot of houses are settled there. So the teacher is saying to Salva, you can't go back home. run out into this wilderness. So he knows that that's what he needs to do to survive. It also mentions the wet and dry season. So in many parts of Africa, especially along the equator, it's pretty much hot all year. But there are two seasons of the year. There's usually a wet season, as you can see on the top, where there's a lot of green. But then there's also the dry season for the other half of the year, where it's very, very dry, and you can imagine really, really hard to find water. So you can imagine that with all this gunfire, the thought of having to run into the bush must be really, really scary. The war had started 2 years earlier. Salva did not understand much about it, but he knew that rebels from the southern part of Sudan, where he and his family lived, were fighting against the government, which was based in the north. Most of the people who lived in the north were Muslim, and the government wanted all of Sudan to become a Muslim country, a place where the beliefs of Islam were followed. But the people in the south were of different religions and did not want to be forced to practice Islam. They began fighting for independence from the north. The fighting was scattered all around southern Sudan, and now the war had come to where Salva lived. The boys scrambled to their feet. Some of them were crying. The teacher began hurrying the students out the door. Salva was near the end of the line. He felt his heart beating so hard that its pulse pounded in his throat and ears. He wanted to shout, "I need to go home. I must go home." But the words were blocked by the wild thumping in his throat. When he got to the door, he looked out. Everyone was running. Men, children, women carrying babies. The air was full of dust that had been kicked up by all those running feet. Some of the men were shouting and waving guns. Salva saw all this with one glance. Then he was running too, running as hard as he could into the bush, away from home. Thanks for following along. That's the end of chapter 1. Tune in tomorrow to see what will happen next.